It's so much easier. So much easier.
You're noticing the small things.
You've got to find that kind of time where you go, it's the right thing to do.
That's the key. Better care. Got 400 snakes and whatever. That's they're able to cope with that. Me at about 160 plus reptiles, that was just stressful.
Definitely an animal hoarder. I'm happy to admit that.
One of the biggest things for me was actually going out in the field and seeing where these animals are coming from. You can burn out on lizards real quick, and I've seen it happen.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another video here. In this video we're going to talk about something that's a little bit different, and I think it's something that very much relates to what's been happening in my life and my kind of thinking over the last few years, kind of chopping and changing as far as having my reptile pets here at home. And yeah, we're going to talk about running a bit of a smaller collection or a smaller group of animals and pets, and yeah, basically just the pros to it. So, as you guys know, I have very drastically reduced the amount of animals that I keep, and honestly, I wish I'd done this a lot sooner. And I've still got plans to probably reduce a few numbers here and there as well, which I've touched on in past videos and things. The biggest thing for me is obviously having my son come into my life. Anybody that's a parent knows how time-consuming children are, and you want to give them your all, and I was essentially using this as my child, this was my passion prior to having my own son. So yeah, having him coming into my life was an absolute blessing, because I needed to kick a stack of animals out of his future bedroom, and I needed to kind of really look at what I was keeping and going, does this make a monetary sense as far as, feeding and heating and all that sort of stuff, because children cost a lot to raise, a lot more than a reptile. And it's one of those things that it kind of drove me in a bit of a direction to maybe think about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And I changed a whole bunch of stuff along the way. So obviously you got to keep in mind that this is coming from somebody that was previously definitely an animal hoarder. I'm happy to admit that. We all kind of get stuck in that mindset, especially when we first start out in this reptile hobby, and we've got to collect all the animals, we want to try it all, we want to see it all, we want to see all the pros and cons. People on YouTube are showing us the new shiny critter that's out and available. We kind of get sucked into that sort of whirlpool of a mentality that you've got to have all these critters and it's cool to have a lot of animals, and I was no different. I was the kind of guy that, when I first got into the reptile hobby, like a lot of people, watched a lot of things like Snake Bites TV. You saw a lot of big breeders here in Australia and what they were doing and what they were keeping and how they were setting things up. And to be frank, it was a lot of Tupperware. So, we were stacking drawers. I was no different. I had knobtail geckos and Antaresia and carpet pythons and all this sort of stuff, womas, all these sorts of things, just like absolutely stacked in, plastic racking systems, which I'm not going to go down the whole rack versus terrarium debate and stuff in this video, or at least try not to. We all kind of start somewhere and we have a kind of thought on how we want to keep animals and pros and cons to them. Racks have their place. I'll say it. Racks have their place. I've got racks here. And for me personally, it's about baby snakes. But in the past, I was keeping adults and these sorts of things, and I'll chuck up a few photos and stuff that I've found along the way and past setups and iterations of my kind of enclosures and all this sort of thing as I go. But that changed for me, and it changed in a big way.
So for me personally, I did start out with a lot of pythons and a lot of geckos and stuff that could particularly be kept in racking systems. And that was all good and true. But eventually I started getting into other lizards and things as well. So things like bearded dragons, little dwarf monitors, things that kind of needed an actual terrarium or vivarium or, a more elaborate setup as such. And whilst going down that sort of route, you start doing a few things. You start putting a few decorations and things in enclosures, some logs, some mulch, whatever it might be, to kind of try to make something that looks, half decent, or what you think is adequate as far as that animal's needs go. And over time, obviously things change. Now, one of the biggest things for me was actually going out in the field and seeing where these animals are coming from and seeing what they're doing and seeing what they're utilizing and how they're kind of behaving in that sort of environment. It's all good and true if you can't do that sort of stuff, but at the same time, you can do research into it. There's plenty of things out there. There's plenty of herpers here in Australia and overseas where you can watch videos, see hopefully where they're kind of coming from. I know some videos it's kind of hard to show habitat and such, but in saying that, there's nothing stopping you hopping on the internet these days and being able to kind of see just whereabouts these actual animals come from and what they do in the wild and some natural behaviours that have been observed. Now, I will reiterate that I am by no means a perfect keeper. We're all human at the end of the day, and we do make mistakes and things do happen. One thing for me though is I just noticed that, having so many critters and stuff and so many different varieties of critters, going from pythons and geckos and skinks and goannas and dragons and, you name it, just a bit of everything. It was kind of hard to retain focus on what was actually happening with certain groups of animals. And it's not until recently where I really kind of narrowed it down into essentially my arid kind of herp room and also my few tropical species elsewhere in the home, that I kind of narrowed it down and went, this is actually getting easier. It's reducing different types of feed. It's reducing different size feeds in particular. It's chopping and changing the way that I'm able to do things here and the speed in which I'm able to do things, which then allows me to also notice different things happening with my animals. I feel like this video is going to be a bit of a kind of like just rant and, rant and rave as such, as far as my mind's kind of racing with these sorts of ideas, but hopefully you can kind of follow along with my rough train of thought on this one. Years gone by, I remember maxing out at about 160 reptiles or thereabouts, including a bunch of hatchlings and stuff, which to some people, that's nothing. They've got 400 snakes and whatever, they're able to cope with that. Me at about 160 plus reptiles, that was just stressful. I'm talking geckos and pythons in particular, and also dwarf monitors and things like that. It's a lot of mouths to feed. I think if you're doing snakes, you can kind of, chop and change your days as to which animals you're working on and such, and it's a little bit easier to kind of keep on top of. As soon as you've got bugs involved, as soon as you've got animals that have higher metabolism involved, it is a different ball game. I don't care what anybody says. You can burn out on lizards real quick, and I've seen it happen. I've had mates do it. One mate in particular that I can think of, he hammered dragons. I'm talking, he was like the dragon guy for a few years there. And he got to the point where he's just like, man, I can't do this anymore. And that's fair enough. He needed to get some variety in his life, which is fine. And it was one of those things where you could kind of see that change in that particular person to go, this is just insane. It's just too much work. Somewhat recently for myself, I kind of felt myself burning out on the geckos a little bit. Don't get me wrong, I love geckos and they're always going to have a place in my heart. I'm always going to get excited when I see a cool species. I'm always going to have that sort of love and that passion for those group of animals. They're kind of where I came from, and it's, always going to be near and dear to my heart. But in saying that, it's also one of those things that added, for me in particular, an extra couple of feeds a week into the nocturnal species. It is one of those things that it was just kind of just a little tiny bit more workload. Now I know it wasn't a lot, it was only about 20 odd geckos, but when you kind of tally that up over the amount of hours you spend in your reptile room or looking after your pets in a week, it adds up. It all does. And for me, that was just kind of getting to the point where I went, it's just a little bit too much with what I can cope with right now, and I'd rather reduce my numbers and give my animals better care. That's the key, better care. How can we keep bettering ourselves to actually look after these critters? And for me, I just wanted to remove a piece of the puzzle, so to speak, and just try to get to that next stage. And it's always going to be to get to that next stage. how many animals do I actually need to have? What do I actually really enjoy? For everybody around there, you know that, Gil and I like these little guys that are unfortunately hiding from the camera right now because they're chasing cockroaches. These guys are where it's at for me. These are the ones that I really love to see and enjoy, and, they're what excites me when I come into the room and I see them all out basking and doing their things, and, oh wow, I got a clutch of eggs, or this animal's doing this. Like, dwarf monitors in general, actually, they tickle my fancy. And, I went away from them years ago because of these horrible bugs and stuff like that, and allergies and all sorts. And once I've kind of got a little bit more, not know-how, but I'm kind of like dealing with it, it was easy to kind of come back in and look after these guys. And I just love them. I don't know what it is. I just love them. They tickle my fancy. They're active. They do their thing all day. I can come in here and see little quirks on different particular lizards and things. Like, it's just one of those things that I just love these little lizards. I say that as I got this little Tanami Gillanai out. He's having a bit of a shed. These little guys are just so active, and you can't see it right now, but there's a couple of doing acrobats behind me as well. So these little guys are just mad lizards, and I love them. And for me, that was just a no-brainer. These guys are staying. There's no chance of them going anywhere. Yeah, it was just one of those things that I was just like, I don't know what it is. They just make me tick. Like this Tristis right now, up the top here, climbing around on this branch. Like, for me, that was just like the kind of kick in the guts to go, okay, these guys are never going anywhere. They're something that I love working on. What do I actually love? And for me, pythons were one of those things that they were kind of near and dear to where I started. I always dreamt about getting green tree pythons. That was like any kid, you see a green tree python in the book, and that's just like, you've got to do it. You've got to have it. And I think that's a species that's always going to be with me. And it's not just because they're a pretty snake that sits on a stick or anything like that. I actually just genuinely find them super intriguing. Like the other night, I found one of my hatchlings just like cruising around on the ground looking for a feed and checking things out, and caught a lure at you, and like, they just got so many little interesting attributes. So they're never going anywhere. But I'm now kind of looking at my roughies and my children's pythons, and I'm going, I don't actually think I need you guys here, and I think there's somebody else that might love you more. And that's okay to admit that sort of stuff too. It's okay to reach out to friends that that love things. Like recently, for example, I had Cooper around here, and he was just like, he could not stop staring at little Oakley the she-oak skink, and I simply turned around to him. I said, he's looking for a new home if you'd like him. I'm not rushing into finding him a home or anything like that, but if you're interested, please mate, he's yours, and worst case, if you fall out in love with him or whatever, he's got a home here. But at the same time, to see Cooper loving that animal, it was just a no-brainer for me to go, it's okay for me to let animals go. And you've got to find that kind of time where you go, it's the right thing to do. It's hard. It's really hard for me to let go of all the geckos that I'd accumulated over the last few years and go through that sort of mental process of, I've got to sell some of these or find them homes or do whatever. It can be a bit of a shock to the system, but it was the best thing I ever did. It was the best thing I ever did. I now have under 40 reptiles, which for me is an astronomical number that's low. For some people that might be like, that's heaps, you got stacks. And that's okay, we all have varying different degrees of where we're at. For myself, I hovered around 70 or 80 for years. Like, that was just normal. That was normal. And it gets to the point where, we all experience losses with animals. Things happen with animals. And it gets hard, where you're kind of just scratching your brain going, why did that happen? How could I have fixed that? What could I have done? And for me, I think just because of my work schedules and things, having less was just the best thing I could do. Like, take recently, for example, I noticed a bunch of my lizards were starting to get really what looked like dehydrated. I just didn't have the time, because I was spread so thin, to notice things quickly until it was kind of too late. The biggest thing that I noticed, and it was thanks to a particular podcast, Reptiles and Research, with the Beardy Vet. Man, if you haven't seen that podcast, go and listen to it. Can't rave about it enough. But at a particular moment in that podcast, I think it was about the 1 hour 55 minute mark, where he was talking about the ideal bearded dragon setup. That was a bit of a game changer for me. He was talking about deep heat projectors or deep heat emitters, whichever you'd like to call them. The ones. They're kind of like the silver cone-like thing. I had them in all the enclosures. He turned around and he said that it's been proven that they activate the water in animals' bodies differently, and it tends to dry out your lizards. Now, I did have a particular friend as well that kind of said that he'd noticed that in a few of his lizards, and I hadn't noticed it in mine. And it wasn't until I actually lost my original pair of Gilbert and Jill, that I was really like, man, what's going on here? Something's going on. These animals shouldn't have passed. I kind of thought one of them in particular, Gilbert, was a bit older, but at the same time, I still thought he should have had years left in him. And it wasn't until I noticed that one of the animals that was in this particular enclosure here started to get really, really skinny. And I was like, okay, I went through the process. I wormed my whole collection or group of animals multiple times, thinking maybe I've brought in something. You know, obviously I do a lot of enrichment with these animals and I bring in branches and that sort of thing. So it's not impossible for me to have brought in a pathogen of some description. I went through that process, didn't fix anything. And then I discovered that podcast. And when he said that, I was just like, oh, you've only been using these things for a couple of years now. And it's this point in time where all of a sudden you start noticing something going slightly wrong. So the first thing I did is, just by trial, I ripped out all of those deep heat projectors. Every single one of them. Every animal that I had them on, swapped them out to incandescent light globes, just like this silly shiny bugger up here. I'm not a particular fan of these. I don't like the yellow glow that they put out and things, but I don't care. At the end of the day, if my animals are happy, that's fine. Within 2 weeks, animals started to put back on weight. They started to hold more condition. I didn't have to feed them nearly as much to get them to hold that water weight, essentially. That's my anecdotal experience. Whether it is actually that was the cause or something, I can't tell you for certain. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a vet, but coming from a vet that said that about the deep heat projectors and emitters, I just took that as what's the worst that can happen? I've got a bunch of light globes, I can just swap them out and see what happens. And I did that. I'm never going back to them. Never going back. I got hundreds and hundreds of dollars sitting in a box up there. You know, might keep them in a pinch just if I need to swap out a light globe for a day because one of these guys blow or something like that, but that's the only thing they're going to be used for now. So yeah, I can't believe that I didn't notice that. But at the same point, I think it got to the point where I had so many little animals and less of them to kind of go, you're noticing the small things. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things that over time, you kind of just cruise past your enclosures, you throw food in, you put water here, you do this, you do that, and you go about your day. But it wasn't until I had way less that I kind of really noticed that the little things on every single animal, the little bit of condition here, that this is happening to this particular species there. That wasn't until that particular point where I kind of reduced it right down that I started noticing that. So yeah, that was kind of a bit of a blessing and a curse in disguise. You know, obviously I needed to rectify things and I needed to fix things, and that's okay. You can learn from your mistakes. But at the same time, if I didn't have so little critters and I was just kind of going about my business, going about looking after my 70 to 80 odd reptiles, I might not have noticed that, and I might have had more animals drop. You know, it's still shocking to me, and I feel so guilty for losing 2 critters during that course. But like, I potentially could have lost everything, and it would have been due to my neglect. So I'm happy to admit my fault. I'm very happy to admit my fault. But it's how do you better yourself from there? So by having a lot less critters, it has allowed me to have more time to clean. These guys are messy, as you can tell by that glass. But you know what? It's not as daunting. When I had 70 or 80 reptiles and I was kind of, you know, cleaning here and there, by the time you finished, it was all messy again. It was all horrible. And nowadays, it might last me a week before I have to give it a good clean. I can spot clean during the week and, you know, pick up a few poos here and there and do all the sort of regular things you do, water bowls, all the rest of it. But doing this with 22 lizards in this room, it's so much easier. So much easier. It comes with so many pros as well, you know, like less animals, less heat, less electricity, less everything. I was thinking about feeding that lizard, but apparently it's not hungry. So, you know, there's just a bit of less of everything, really. And it all adds up. You know, at the end of the day, if you've got less animals, you've got less food, you've got less electricity, you've got less bills in general as far as welfare goes. Less chance of vet bills because you've got less critters as well. Because, like, let's face it, we have to take animals to vets. Old Sonic behind me here, you know, had to go and get his teeth cleaned last year, and that set me back heaps of money. It was like close to $1,000 getting his teeth cleaned and x-rays and, you know, all these sorts of things just to make sure that he's all right. That's one lizard. Granted, that's the only time he's ever had to see a vet in his 10 or 11 years of existence, so I'm lucky. But in saying that, you know, if I had to really go through and check everything here, and, you know, God forbid you had pythons and they had like nidovirus or something like that, and you had to test all of them and go through there, like, I feel very sorry for anybody that has to go through that. That would be, you know, that would probably make me give up on it, to be honest. Like, it'd be heartbreaking. And the amount of cost and stuff involved in there, and a lot of coin. It's not also the monetary value though, but like, how much is your time worth to you? You know? The amount of time that I had to spend in here and clean and do all these sorts of things, it was an absolute nightmare. It's you know, put aside that time, and it was just super daunting. Whereas nowadays, when I can run through here and clean all of this up and have it all pretty spruce smooth within about an hour, that's not too bad, you know, realistically. You know, the best part about having more time though, is not only do you get to spend that with the family and the loved ones and such, but I get to spend so much more time sitting in this room, watching these lizards, watching behaviour, seeing what they're up to. And for me, that's the reason why you keep these animals. You don't want to just be feeding and cleaning and doing the daily grind. You want to be enjoying these guys. You want to be having fun with these guys. And to be able to have that time now, to actually be able to sit down and watch my little Gill and I army run around and smash woodies and stuff everywhere, or, you know, scurry up and down branches and that. Yeah. You don't get that back. You don't get time back. I love being able to have that time to just sit down in here and watch these little critters go about their daily business. You know, that's... You just can't beat it. You honestly can't. I don't care what anybody says. This is why you keep your reptiles. You want to see these guys doing what they want to do inside of these habitats that you create. That's a massive takeaway too in its own right. Being able to create natural habitats or better habitats for your animals to actually enjoy, that's an absolute game changer. You know, if you have 400 pythons at home, there is no way that you're doing anything like this for them. I don't care what anybody says. You can't. You physically cannot. The amount of space, the amount of time, the amount of heating and electricity and all the rest of it, you wouldn't be doing it. That's why rack systems are convenient for keeping lots and lots of snakes. Oh, just watched a ninja Gill and I just absolutely nail a woody. Just jumped from a branch, hit it on the side of a wall, and then slid down the wall. Don't get me wrong, my electricity bill still sucks because obviously I've got all these larger terrariums and vivariums and things like that, you know, they require electricity to fill them full of heat and all the rest of it. I'm lucky that in this particular room, I kind of made sure that majority of my hot climate animals, they're in this room, so ambient heat can kind of help heat it up. It sucks in this room in summer, I tell you what, like we're sitting in here and it would be close to 30 degrees right now, ambient in here. It's toasty, I'll give it that. But this is one of those things, you know, if you don't have as many animals, you can get a bit more tricky and start creating some of these sorts of habitats that are even better for your animals. And, you know, if you had 2 lizards at home, you could make things that absolutely smoke any of this out of the water. And I've seen it happen plenty of times. And that's the thing. You can enjoy so little animals, but put more time and energy into how to keep them, that you could be leading the future of how to actually look after these animals. You know, granted, I do think that I've done some things in here that a lot of people wouldn't do, and there's a lot of, you know, kind of automation and things like that that come in pretty handy and, you know, do take a little bit of stress off my shoulders as far as, you know, looking after a few of these critters and things go. But in the same breath, there is no reason why anybody else out there couldn't do tenfold what I'm doing here, and I'm sure they have. All of these enclosures, when you look at them down to their basic sort of level, are very simplistic. Let's just put it that way. They look good, they're aesthetically pleasing, and the animals have exactly what they need to enjoy their lives and such. But in the same breath, there's no reason as to why you couldn't do something that was a lot more complicated, but, you know, almost a hands-off approach, and you'd be able to have things crazy automated. Like, I have a lot of ideas that run around my head at night, let's put it that way, and sometimes I get caught up in my own brain, and I'm up until wee hours of the morning trying to go to sleep, but my brain's just firing on all cylinders, and I'd love to be able to put all this sort of stuff in practice. And it's not impossible. I've got my kind of 1-day plans and stuff like that, but at the same time, it's people out there, some of the stuff that's coming out these days is just mental. It's just crazy. It's awesome stuff. So yeah, I'm hoping that this is kind of, albeit a video of me spitballing and, throwing some ideas and pros out there as to why you should keep less animals and why it'll benefit you and your animals. I hope that you're kind of taking something from this video. It's not me trying to have an absolute blast on people that have, 100 plus animals or anything in a collection. If that's what you're into and you can maintain it, more power to you. I can't. That's just the bottom line. That's just me. But I'm just trying to give you a bit of my experience as to how I've enjoyed the change from having, 100 plus animals to coming down to below 40. It's a massive change for me. I know some things kind of get in your mind sometimes, in particular for myself, being on YouTube and such, you can kind of get in that kind of mindset of like, maybe I need to get something to kind of like put a new video out there. I've never really been a person like that. I have gotten new critters and things like that, and I have shared them for sure. But at the same time, I would never purposefully go out and get a critter for the sake of making a video and then just palm that critter on. It would never be that sort of case. I think over the years, it's just about refinement. And after keeping reptiles for about 10 odd years now, I'm refining it. I'm kind of finding my tastes, finding how I like to keep my animals, finding that work-life balance with keeping my animals and my pets, and try not to overshoot it. It's very easy to get in the mindset of, oh, I want that, or I'd love that. And I get that too. I stay away from the classifieds websites, let's put it that way. I just try to stay off there. I try to stay off Facebook and stuff as much as I can, because you get tempted. But it's about having restraint. Restraint and refinement. And you'll go far. Well, I hope you've gotten something out of my reptile rant for the day. And, it's good for me to vent this off my chest as well. And I can see a shift in the hobby. So it's good to be able to see other people kind of going along this sort of route and seeing more naturalistic enclosures and people wanting to see the behaviours in their animals and such. It's a big positive change. So with that being said, I've got animals to feed and enjoy. So I'm going to love you and leave you all with a little shot of my crazy pet room in a Kimberley rock monitor running up that back rock up there. Until next time, take it easy, and I'll catch you then.